Hello, guys, and welcome to today's episode of r/nosleep radio. Hopefully this episode will record properly, and I will not have to restart. But in today's episode, I'm reading to you parts 1 and 2 of Grandma's Stories by Midnight Writings. I do hope you enjoy. Links to their Reddit will be in the description below. And yeah, so if I can hop over to my web browser, maybe we can get right to it. Oh no, it has to reload. There we go. So, Grandma's Stories by Midnight Writings. Lynette Tybalt didn't get many visitors anymore. A family member here, an old friend there, but me, I saw her every day. We had fallen into a steady routine pretty quickly. I'd wake up, shower, throw my hair into a bun on the top of my head, and walk 2 blocks, rain or shine, down the street to the assisted living facility. The building was 3 stories tall, each floor specializing on a different area. In reality, the hierarchy was based on the amount of care needed. To put it bluntly, the worse the person, the higher the floor. The first floor was for people who were still all there in the brain, but just needed help with getting dressed and bathed and that sort of thing. They were welcome to come and go as they pleased, just as long as they were home by curfew. The second floor was for people with early state cognitive issues like Alzheimer's and dementia. The third and final floor were for people who didn't really know who they were. Some of the workers crudely labeled it the zombie zone. You could easily pass 3 or 4 people staring off into space or pacing around without any real destination. I hated that nickname and refused to call it that. The third floor was under high security, and anyone who wanted to get in or out needed a security pass and the door codes. This made sure that no patient would wander off and get lost. I pulled at the collar of my stiff uniform. The white scrub-looking shirt still hadn't grown on me. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the second floor, wondering how many times I've ridden it already and how many times I would in the future. "You should really start taking the stairs," Larry teased me, pulling his mop bucket closer to him. "You'll get a little extra cardio." "You calling me fat?" I teased before shaking my head. "Trust me, I walk to and from here every day. Cardio's the last thing I need." "And what's the first thing you need?" he asked, leaning on the end of his mop. "A freaking donut." I laughed, waving goodbye as the elevator doors popped open. I said my good mornings to the nurses that I passed and smiled at the random people with their families as I made my way to the main station to check in. "Morning, Lana," Stacy smiled. "How's she been doing?" "Pretty good," I nodded, filling out my name at the time I got in. "Her short-term memory is great. She can recall things from her childhood, but it's that spot in the middle that isn't there yet." Stacy placed a sad smile over her face, taking the clipboard from me. "Just keep working with her. You never know. Miracles can happen every day." I nodded, letting her words slide in one ear and out the other. I don't want to sound cynical, but I stopped getting my hopes up a while ago. It's not that I think Mrs. Tybalt couldn't get her memory back. It's just that I didn't want to be constantly waiting for it. If it happened, then great. If it didn't, then there's nothing to be let down about. I pushed those thoughts out of my head and gently knocked on room 289. "Miss Tybalt, you awake?" "Yes, dear," she chirped. "You ask me that every morning. Every morning I'm always awake. Just come in. No need for theatrics." She smiled, putting down her Reader's Digest. "And how many times have I told you not to call me that? We are on a first-name basis, dear. You call me Lynette or you call me Grandma." She insisted. "I know, I'm sorry," I smiled, closing the door behind me. "Look what Gregory brought me," she beamed, holding up the single flower. "He said he clipped it from one of the boxes on the balcony. Will we be able to visit the balcony soon?" "Sure, I'll check in with the nurses and see what they say." I set my bag down in the corner of the room before cleaning up the little odds and ends. How are you feeling this morning? Just fine, dear, she smiled, dog-earing the corner of her page. I did have a bit of trouble sleeping last night, though. Oh no, I whined, her brows furrowing at the idea of her wide awake all alone in her room. Any particular reason why? Oh, she waved it off, dancing her fingers through the air. Just memories. I stood up, holding the collected pile of clothes still in my arms. Memories? Mm-hmm. She smiled, wiggling her toes under the blanket. I could feel the threat of a smile popping onto my lips as I tossed the clothes in her hamper. Memories of what? There it was again, that tactless hope threatening to bubble over the surface and spoil everything. I just needed her to remember something from the middle of her life, not just stories. I wanted her to remember her family and how they visited a few months ago. I wanted her to look at her nightstand and read the cards from her children, smiling as she told me how they came to visit her. I took a deep breath in, trying to calm my excitement as I waited for her answer. Memories of when I was a child, she said, looking at the wall in front of her as if they were playing on a projector. My shoulders sagged ever so slightly as I finished dusting off her windowsill, throwing the blinds open. Really? Well, those should have been happy memories, right? I prayed my voice didn't sound too disappointed. That's what you get for getting your hopes up, I scolded myself. When I didn't get a response, I looked over my shoulder to see the dreamy look on her face still bright as ever. Her head was gently cocked to the side, her short hair curling, standing in place. The gray wires had become fragile with age, threatening to break off if he even touched them too hard. Her deep wrinkles were firmly drawn around her small face, crinkling her round cheeks and coming to an end at her soft jaw. Miss Tybalt, I asked, my voice just above a whisper so I didn't scare her. Did I ever tell you I enjoy scary stories? She asked, her gaze finally setting on mine. You mentioned it, yeah. My granddaughter and I would spend hours reading spooky stories or watching scary movies. She gently shook her head, a chuckle vibrating in her chest. Oh, my little turtle. Turtle? I felt the heat radiate through my body, my lips tugging at the quarters. Oh yes, that was my nickname for her. The girl was obsessed with turtles. Sea turtles, that is. Snapping turtles, that. She giggled, waving her hands in the air. She was a hoot. So you remember her? Excitement reared its fickle head again. What more do you... My question was cut off when she started talking. Those stories were what was keeping me up last night. She nodded, holding her knotted hands in her lap. I'm sure they would keep me up too, I assured her. If you and your grandmother read those scary stories all the time, you must have them memorized by now. Oh no, not those stories. She shook her head. Those are children's stories, fables if you will. I'm talking about my stories. She raised a wagging finger in the air. No, I never told those stories to Little Turtle. Why not? They're much too real, too close to home, to the family. She didn't need to hear those. She shook her head. A mischievous glint ran across her eyes as she looked at me, squishing down a bit further into her bed. Would you like to hear one? Me? Why not? We're both grown women. We don't mind a little spook here and there, right? She smiled, raising her eyebrows at mine. I couldn't help the laugh that came out of my lips. I knew I should have said no. These were stories she hadn't told anyone. I didn't want to cross a line, but I couldn't help myself. I put down my cleaning supplies and pulled up a chair next to her bed, crossing my arms over my chest. All right, spill. The old woman's face beamed with a light of youth I had never seen before. She wiggled into place, scrunching her shoulders a couple of times in excitement before clearing her throat. Growing up, my grandparents lived with us, me, my mother, and my father. We had a big house, huge. Gorgeous to look at and even better to live in. She smiled, rubbing her hands together. Well, my grandparents were old. You know, as people tend to get. Not me, of course, other people. I laughed, pulling my legs up into the chair to get comfortable. Anyway, my grandfather ended up passing away. He was a strong man with an even stronger mind. He insisted that he could still run the mill machine on our family farm all by himself. Said no one could do it better than him. Well, he couldn't. Ended up getting himself milled, poor man. Ground to bits with the grains. Oh my God. I placed my hand over my heart. My grandmother didn't take too well to it either. She went downhill fast. Not her body, no sir. She could have run laps around us if she wanted. She chuckled, playing with the knuckles on her spotted fingers. No, it was her mind that went. Pa always said it was because of grandfather. His death pushed her off the edge of the map, so to say. Anything specific? I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. You know, muttering to herself, standing in the corners of the house. But one night I remember waking up in my bed, wide awake. It was as if I'd never gone to sleep. I remember sitting up and hearing the barn door in our backyard roll open and shut. My bedroom faced the barn, so I hopped up and looked out the window. Just as the barn was shutting, I saw her. Your grandma? She nodded, snapping her fingers in the air. Like that, I was up and out of bed, flung my robe over my shoulders, popped on my rain boots, and went outside. I thought she had started sleepwalking or something. Last thing I needed was for her to get herself hurt, so I ran out back and ran as fast as my skinny legs would take me, she said, patting the blanket-clad legs. And the closer I got to the barn, the louder her chanting got. I couldn't make out any words, so I stopped at the door to listen for a moment. It was my grandma's voice, clear as day, but I hadn't the slightest clue to what she was saying. Did you run away? I asked, knowing sure as hell I would have. Oh, no, she shook her head. I went in, I opened the door ever so slightly and just peeked my head inside. The entire barn was lit up. Little flames from candles made shadows dance along the tall wooden walls. Some candles bobbed while others seemed to spit fire into the air like they ran on gasoline. And then came the smell. At first, I thought it was just the slowly rusting tools, like the smell your fingers get after you hold a penny. But the air was thicker than that. It was wet and heavy. Like any minute, a rain cloud could have burst right there inside the barn. I remember my eyes flickering from candle to candle until they landed in the middle of the barn right on my grandmother. She stood in the center of what looked to be a hand-drawn circle, with her arms spread out into the air. In one hand was a knife. In the other was a mutilated chicken. What? The poor creature, feathers and blood all clotting on its body, its head lolled to one side, barely hanging on by the piece of skin still attached. Everything else had been sawed through. The circle my grandmother had drawn was made from the chicken's blood, bits of hay getting caught up in the coagulating mixture, creating gore-filled tumbleweeds along the barn floor. She shook her head, clasping her hands together. I don't remember if I made a noise or not, but my grandma's head snapped in my direction. Her eyes glowed in the candlelight, or that's what my father told me. She sighed, wagging her finger again. I told him her eyes were glowing. They were glowing straight from her head, but he wouldn't listen. Tried convincing me that it was just from the candles, but I know what I saw. What was she doing in there? The older woman stopped and looked at me, wrinkling her nose a bit as a smirk spread across her thin lips. Do you believe in curses, dear? I felt my head shake before I could really think about the question. No, not in particular. Oh, good, then my stories won't affect you. She straightened herself back in her bed and continued on. But even then, it wasn't her glowing eyes that made me turn back and run. No, it was her smile. She grinned at me, this tooth-filled smile that seemed to pull at her own skin. She stretched her muscles beyond their limits, making the already wrinkled flesh around her mouth fold in on itself. Her lips were curled over and almost seemed to split. That's what made me run. I remember running straight into my parents' bedroom, whooping and hollering about Grandma's eyes and chicken's blood. But you know what made my pa jump out of bed? Miss Tybalt asked, and I shook my head. Candles in the barn. Boy, he hopped out of that bed so fast. She laughed, making her shoulders bounce. Ma told me to not come out and that I needed to stay in my room, so I did, but I watched them from my window. They ran out there, Pa in his long underwear and nightshirt, Ma in her long nightgown. I would have laughed if I weren't so worried for Grandma. I remember watching Pa throw open the barn doors, that little bit of extra moonlight letting me see fully into the orange-lit barn. Blood had been smeared all over the place, up the walls, over the stalls, across the floor, and it wasn't just chicken's blood either, no. She got to the cows, the pigs, and the horses. Oh my God, was all I could say. I know, poor creatures, she agreed, reaching forward to pat my arm. But I don't know how she could have gotten to them all. Their bodies were mangled. It was as if their skin had peeled back and their innards exploded. Father didn't keep the doors open for long. Both him and Ma disappeared into the barn for a bit. Soon after, Ma came out with Grandma, and I couldn't tell who looked worse. Ma's face was about as white as your nightgown. All her blood might as well have been left in the barn with the animals. She herself stumbled up the hill towards the house, trying her best to guide Grandma. Miss Tibble's eyes glazed over a bit, shaking her head slightly. Now she looked wrong. Wrong like crazed? I asked, searching for the right word. No, it was the complete opposite, Miss Tibble said, eyes going to that far-off place. She was smiling, completely and utterly happy with herself. She clapped her hands, the spring in her step making Ma stumble over the knotted grass. She kept babbling on and on about something working. I couldn't quite catch what she had said. The wind carried her words way before they got to my ears, but I do remember her looking my way again, this time wiggling her fingers at me. I shut the curtain so fast the entire rod almost came down. She blinked, bright eyes coming back to the present. Yeah, that was the first time I was ever afraid of Grandma. Did you ever find out why your grandma did it? She nodded her head. Of course, it wouldn't be a good story if I didn't have some sort of explanation. She smiled. Ma and Pa told me to stay away from Grandmother. Said she wasn't feeling right. I knew this was a lie. I heard her walking around upstairs all the time, tracing around the room from one end to the other. I heard her giggles throughout the night, rambling on about how it would all be happening soon and how she was so excited to see him. See who? I leaned forward in my chair. Well, breakfast! Dennis' voice rang from the door as it sprang open. I bounced backward into my chair, grabbing at my chest as I sank lower into the cushion. Whoops, sorry, he apologized. Didn't mean to scare you. You're fine, I waved, letting my head flop backwards. Good morning, Mrs. Tibble, he beamed, setting her tray of food over her lap. How are you doing? Just lovely, she sang, and please, call me Grandma. No formalities here, she ordered. I was just telling, She pointed at me, brows furrowed. Lana, I said, my gut sinking at the fact that she couldn't remember my name. I had been helping her for over a month, and every day I seemed to have to reintroduce myself, but not fully, just my name. Oh, what a pretty name, she gasped, clasping her hands into her chest. I was just telling Lana a little story. Anything interesting? Dennis asked, handing her a napkin. Not really. Nothing that can't wait until after breakfast, she winked. I nodded, smiling at her as I went over to my bag and grabbed out a granola bar. I hunkered back down into my chair and waited for Dennis to leave so I could hear the rest of the story. And that was part 1 of Grandma's stories. Part 2 is coming up next, but first I need to get rid of a notification because notifications bother me. So, part 2 of Grandma's stories by Midnight Writings. I waited for the door to click back into its place, snapping a piece of crumbly granola bar off between my teeth before leaning forward in my chair. So what happened? Miss Tibble giggled, her shoulders bouncing up to her ears as she gently stirred oatmeal. Feels like a horror movie, The excitement in my body faltered a bit. It did feel like a horror movie. I got so swept up in the story that I forgot this wasn't some fairy tale. It wasn't a made-up script that was written to scare the pants off of gullible audiences. It was a story about a family, a story so close to home that the narrator didn't even bother telling her own kin about it. I sat back in my chair and took another bite of granola. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, I told her. Oh, don't worry, dear, she soothed, waving the thought away. If people didn't tell stories, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. I know, I nodded. It's just that this story seems pretty personal. If you ever feel like you don't want to go on with telling me. Yo, hush, she interrupted with a smile. My family hasn't seen me in quite a while. I have every right to tell my stories. My lips may have smiled, but I knew my eyes held sadness. The truth is, they had visited her. They just stopped coming a couple months ago. The struggle of trying to make her remember became too much for them. That's why I stepped up. Where were we, she thought, gently scooping a bit of oatmeal onto her spoon before bringing it to her lips. Oh yes, my grandmother, she remembered, gently blowing the steam away before taking a quick bite. I'd hear her rumbling and mumbling to herself upstairs, pacing back and forth throughout the nights. It got so bad that I eventually asked my parents if she needed help. I'll never forget the look they gave each other. She shook her head, grabbing another bite before talking again. I was still at the age where you think your parents know everything. when you believe that adults are more than human, that there's some sort of protecting machines that know all the right answers. She laughed to herself. My, what an age. Did they tell you what was going on? No, she shook her head, sipping her orange juice. Her shaky hands brought the glass to her lips, spilling a bit onto her blanket. I stood up and quickly grabbed my cleaning cloth from the windowsill, gently dabbing at the orange spots dribbling down her blanket. Thank you, dear, she said, scoffing at herself. Clumsy me. It's fine, I assured, throwing the cloth into the corner of another chair. So what did they do? Nothing, she shrugged. I remember watching them look at each other, and I saw absolutely nothing. There were no secret glances, no hidden meanings, no answers of any kind. They looked like lost children, and that almost scared me more than my grandmother did. She took another bite of her toast, dusting the bits of crumbs from her lips. So I did what I thought was best. I went to speak to grandmother. You weren't scared? Not of her, she shook her head. No, she was just Grandma. What was there to be afraid of? She had lived with us my entire life, helped raise me into the woman I was becoming. I wasn't afraid of her. I was afraid of what she would do or say. I was afraid of what she had become. Miss Tybalt took a deep breath in, sighing a bit. I've come to learn that it's not the people we fear, it's their actions. It's not the person, but their deeds. To me, Grandma was still Grandma, but she had done something in that barn that confused the hell out of me. Pardon my language, she apologized. So I walked right up to her bedroom door, knocked twice because I was a polite young lady, and called to her through the wood, just so she knew who was entering. As soon as I entered that door, I could smell it. Have you ever smelled a candle just after someone blew out the flame? She asked, watching me shake my head. Well, you smell the smoke mostly, but there's also a hint of whatever scent the candle holds. Grandma's room smelled like smoke, wood, and a hint of her perfume. A lavender and fresh powder smell that I had grown used to, but there was something else. She squinted her eyes, trying to describe what she smelled. Like, with a freshly extinguished candle, there's the scent of heat, of fire that used to be. Heat? I asked. Yes, she nodded. It's not so much a scent as it is a sensation. It's a suffocating feeling, like the fire's trying to crawl up your nose and burn its way into your lungs. You smell the singed hair of your nostrils and taste the ash in the back of your throat. It devours your entire body for just a second before you gasp in a breath of fresh air and the feeling goes away. That's what I walked into when I went up into her room. Did she say anything? Not at first. Miss Tybalt took a few hasty bites of oatmeal before getting into the thick of the story. I walked in and saw her sitting at her rocker by the window. She loved to look out and watch the kids playing about. I remember walking across the room and not being able to keep my eyes in one place. Stacks upon stacks of my grandfather's clothes lay perfectly ironed and folded on the floor. Pa said he had cleaned them from the closet and packed them into boxes to give to the church, but Grandma must have taken them out. That was the first thing I asked her. Grandma, why are Grandpa's clothes out of the box? She didn't so much as turn from the window, didn't even miss a beat in her rocking chair. Back and forth, back and forth. I walked closer, this time right behind her, and asked again, Grandma, why are Grandpa's clothes out of the box? This time I reached my hand out and I laid it on her shoulder. Never had I seen that woman move so quickly. My little hand was snatched up into hers before I even had the chance to blink. Her bones felt like heated metal through her skin, almost warm enough to hurt. She had these awful knots in her knuckles that pressed down into the little grooves of my hands. I saw her look down at her own aged fingers, smiling as she rubbed them together. They look a lot similar to these old things. She stretched her arms out in front of her and gazed at her fingers, the nails still neatly polished from when I had done them a few days ago. I told her that she had scared me and tried whipping my hand away, but Grandma had a grip like a vice. She inched her head around, peeling her eyes from the window to lock into mine. They had that same glow in them from the night in the barn, and I don't know how, but I knew that's where the heat was coming from. Her eyes, I asked, almost dropping the granola bar I forgot was in my hand. You know that old saying, the eyes are the window to the soul? Well, my grandma's soul was on fire. I watched a visible shudder travel up the old woman's spine, making her itch at the base of my neck. I tore at her hand, begged her to let me go, told her I wouldn't bug her, said I'd never go into her room again if she would just let me go. And before I knew it, the fire was out. Her eyes were back to normal, and the strange smell was carried away through the open window. My grandma gently patted my hand and cooed at me, telling me she would never want me to stop visiting her. She said that I was the reason she stayed in the house, the reason for the smile on her face. I asked her what was wrong. Why had she held my hand that way and scared me for so long? She pulled the same look my parents made, completely lost. She told me she didn't know what I was talking about, but that it wouldn't matter soon, and I had nothing to be afraid of. My grandma may have been old, but she wasn't stupid, Miss Tibble chuckled. She knew I had been frightened by that night in the barn. She started speaking fast, almost too fast for me to keep up. Talked about the books she had read, the ones the church didn't want anyone reading. Those books weren't safe. She said she had to pay the librarian a pretty penny to get into those books. She said she had done everything right, the ritual was in effect, and that Grandpa Lucas would be back with us in no time. She did a ritual to bring your dead grandpa back, I said. Saying the words aloud made the story feel less real to me. There were no such things as death rituals, right? That she did. In my head, it made sense of the blood and the candles, but she took everything one step further. She always did. Miss Tibble laughed to herself. Grandma had a way of making things difficult. She couldn't just bake one batch of cookies. It always had to be a double batch, even if she complained the entire time about it. Anyway, she brought her hand forward and flipped it palm up, pointing to the fatty part under her thumb. There lay the tiniest nick of a cut in the shape of an X. Instinctively, I reached out to look closer, wanting to make sure she hadn't hurt herself. The old woman looked down at her own hand, shaking her head. She had never done that. She latched onto my tiny wrist and drew small circles in the palm of my hand, whispering something that resembled a chant. Did you hear what she was saying? I asked, watching the old woman nod. What was it? She motioned for me to scoot closer, a glint in her eyes as she reached out for my own hand. This is exactly how I remember it. She slowly dragged her nails along the skin of my hand, the tickling sensation making me want to itch at my palm. Ever so softly I heard her begin to whisper, If I shall fail and thy time waste, take this offer in mine place. Earthly burdens from our brow, have us we a meal for thou. As she finished the line, she took her nail and pressed it into my skin, making an indent in the fatty tissue below my thumb. She turned her hand a bit and made another line across it, a new little X pushed into my skin. A slight shiver ran up my spine, making the old woman look up at me with a giggle. Creepy, right? She sat back in her bed and showed me her palm. She whispered that little chant and then made this in my skin with her nails. I looked down at the tissue below Miss Tibble's thumb and saw a tiny scar in the shape of an X. She did it hard enough to leave a permanent mark? I hissed, revolted at the thought of nails digging that deep into a little child's hand. I'm afraid so, Miss Tibble nodded. I was frozen in place and just let her do it. Between the chant she had sung and the unnatural nature of everything that was going on, my body didn't know what to do. She ran her shaky fingers over the scar a couple of times, something similar to affection littering her eyes. I don't remember feeling any different after that. You always hear in movies that if someone puts a curse on you, you get this weird feeling, she explained, faking a shudder through her fingers. But I was fine, just a little creeped out. Grandma went right back to looking out the window after that, gently rocking back and forth, humming some random tune she made up. You told your parents, right? Oh, goodness, no, Miss Tibble shook her head. I already thought she was dangerous. I didn't want to make things worse. I went right back into my room and stayed there until dinner. The whole time I heard her humming to herself, the creak of her rocking chair vibrating through the ceiling above me. I just kept running my fingers over the new X in my hand. Before I knew it, 4 hours had passed and it was time for dinner. I thought it had only been a couple of minutes, but when I finally tore my eyes from my hand, the sun had already started to hang low in the sky. I watched the faraway look gently cloud back over her eyes, the longer Miss Tibble looked at her hand. Her voice dropped as if she were talking aloud and just forgot that I was here. It still happens to this day. I'll catch myself looking at this damn thing like she had just pressed it into my skin. I can't tell you how many hours I've just wasted staring at it. She settled deeper into her bed, the steam from her oatmeal long gone. My eyes felt locked on her, neither blinking nor able to look away. I willed them to turn down and look at my own hand, my fingers rubbing over the new egg she had just pushed into my own skin. I flinched, crossing my arms over my chest and curling back up into the chair. Did your grandma ever get better? I asked, trying to change the subject from the strange mark. She shook her head. Sadly, no. She just got worse. That night, my parents brought up that they were thinking of getting new furniture. They had the same old chair and table since they got married. Ma said how Miss Sherry, our neighbor who lived closer to town than we did, wanted to do a blanket swap with us, so both families felt like they were getting something new. And Pa said how Mr. Clark was going to help build our new furniture with some of the extra timber he had from a previous project, Miss Tybalt said, trying to move a tray of food off her legs. I quickly got up and took the heavy tray from her shaky fingers, putting it on the table next to me. "Thank you, dear," she smiled before scooting up higher onto her bed. Well, after hearing that, Grandma threw a fit. She slammed her fork down into the wooden tabletop, the prongs awkwardly bowed and chunks of wood were gouged out. She started mumbling about how we couldn't change anything and that we shouldn't touch it. Ma and Pa gave each other another one of those looks that I couldn't quite place before Ma tried talking Grandma off the edge, so to say. She wouldn't listen, just kept babbling about not moving anything, not touching anything. Then she added something about how he wouldn't know his way back if we moved everything. Said that he knew his path and it needed to stay that way. Miss Tybalt shrugged her shoulders, looking at me. I had no clue what was going on. I don't think Ma and Pa did either, but they tried to calm her down. The more they tried, the worse Grandma got. She started shaking, physically shaking, and she got louder and louder, screaming about how we couldn't move anything and that he wouldn't know his way home. She screamed about how he was coming home soon and we needed to get ready. She exploded out of her seat. Miss Tybalt puffed her cheeks. Miss Tybalt puffed, her cheeks becoming redder as the story progressed, and lunged at my father. She kept jabbing at him with her fork. He got stuck a couple times in the hand, arm, shoulder, but when she scratched his face, he got physical back. She shuddered, rubbing her arms. He stood up and just engulfed her in his arms, yelling at my mom to get me away. Next thing I knew, Ma had pulled me up and out of my seat, telling me to go to my room. I could hardly hear her over my grandma's wails. She took a deep breath, her reddened cheeks sinking to a flushed shade of pink. It was like being in a blizzard, you know? I could hear my grandma howling about. I don't know. It was just words at that point, I guess. My father's voice boomed around the house, too, making the walls shake, and my ma's face, though. Her poor face looked completely lost. She stopped, putting her palm against her cheek. Scared. I gently patted her leg, hoping to provide some comfort to her. I'm guessing it doesn't end there, right? Unfortunately not. She smiled, a twinge of sadness hanging from her lips. I spent the rest of the night in my room. My mother came in to check on me a while after the screaming died down, but I just pretended to be asleep. It was the easier option than talking about what had happened. That night, I woke up from a dead sleep to a thematic drumming noise. Bang, bang, bang. Then a pause. Then again. Bang, bang, bang. I thought maybe Father was fixing something that had broken during the scuffle. Grandma was quiet up above me, so I thought it was safe to come out. I figured Father might need some help, but mostly I just wanted to see that he was okay, she admitted, smiling a bit. He was a tough man, but I couldn't imagine having to hold back my own mother from wanting to stab me with a fork. So I followed the noise and came to the living room, and there, on her hands and knees, with a hammer in a hand and a box of nails on the ground next to her, was my grandmother. On her hands and knees, my skeptical tone showing more than I wanted to. How old was she? Too old to be on the ground, Miss Tybalt laughed. She was hammering away at the furniture, connecting the bottoms of the legs right into the hardboard floor. Half-bent nails stuck up all around the furniture, neither her aim nor her strength helping to drive the nail completely into the wood, but by golly, she was making sure that none of our furniture was being moved from their spots. Boy, was Father mad that morning. His booming voice was what woke me up. Father didn't yell often, but when he did... She trailed off, shaking her head. What did he do? I asked, crumpling the last of my granola wrapper into the palm of my hand. Yelled, she chuckled, asked, Why are you doing this? What's wrong with you? The usual questions when someone nails down your furniture. Did you finally get an explanation? No. The short word popped from her mouth. Grandma just sat there, smiling like she won the lottery. Pa said he'd fix the furniture when he got home from work, but he didn't get back until late that night. The moon was fully up before I heard his truck pull into the driveway. I think he was avoiding Grandma at that point, wanting to make sure she was well asleep before he got home. Thing was, Grandma hadn't left her room all day. Once Pa left for work, Ma took Grandma upstairs, told her to get some rest, and she never left. I heard her the whole day talking to herself, giggling and clapping like a child. Needless to say, I spent most of the day outside. Yeah, I would have too, I nodded. That had to be scary to see someone you love go through something like that. To see family deteriorate. My voice dropped into my throat, the heavy words choking out my breath. It was, she nodded. You ever experienced something like that? Miss Dibble asked, her voice dropping too. I nodded my head, eyes fluttering as I tried to push back the pressure of tears in the corners of my sockets. Yeah, I think we all have, or if you haven't, you will. You can't really prepare yourself for something like that until you've experienced it. We exchanged a knowing glance, a glance that's saved for people who know loss. I cleared my throat, So what happened after that? Well, she started talking, but quickly stopped herself, looking back at me with a furrowed brow. Are you sure you want to hear the rest? Of course, I nodded, but because it gets quite strange, she admitted. I've tried telling other people this story, and they always end up laughing. I won't laugh, I promise. I enjoy a good scary story. Oh, I'm afraid this is a bit more than that, dear, Miss Dibble explained, propping herself further up in her bed. And that marks the end of Grandma's Stories Part 2 from, let's scroll back to the top here, from Midnight Writings. Links to Midnight Writing stories will be in the description below. I do hope you enjoyed this month's installment of r/nosleep radio. If you did enjoy, be sure to like and subscribe. You can comment any no sleep stories that you would like me to read for you on this series. As always, this is uploaded once a month on the second Sunday of each month, and it was a pleasure to read these stories for you. Sweet dreams.